Okay, I believe we are ready to begin. Sam and Andrew, can you unmute yourselves and make sure your audio is working correctly?
Hey, Jackie.
Hey, Jackie, can you hear us?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, great. All right, well, welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody who's there is enjoying Miami, and everybody else enjoying committee week from your home or your office. So the International Council, for our presentation, So an agenda for our presentation is, first of all, we want to look at the world economic outlook from a high level. We'll discuss that. Secondly, we're going to just do a brief recap of some of the international construction fatality research that we presented on last year during the committee week. We'll get into, Andrew's going to be presenting on our current findings regarding the different international trading standards around the world. We've profiled a few countries, Denmark, Norway, the UK, and South Africa. We then like to open up, we're hoping to open up the discussion to the rest of the committee on what the international what we should be, the International Council should be researching in the future. We have some ideas, but we would appreciate your feedback. And then finally, we'd like to just discuss, introduce our conference speaker for conference this year in Cleveland. So regarding the international economic outlook, I mean, overall, it's very positive. The growth being projected by the International Monetary Fund as of the second quarter of this year is showing record growth expectation. You see here, I featured a couple of countries and regions, including the US and EU. 6% growth is considered to be one of the strong, if it is realized, is considered one of the strongest growth over 10 years. Japan to a lesser degree, but then you can see China and India have very large growth projections. Now, the reason that the IMF is so positive at the moment, partly, the world economy contracted significantly. I think it was around 3 to 4% last year. So they're expecting a rebound or pent-up demand as a result, which we're seeing a lot of that in the first quarter. Secondly, they have optimistic outlook because the rollout of the vaccines is the production of vaccines and the rollout of vaccinations is coming in many countries quicker than expected. The one thing they did mention is that these projections, and that, they're just projections, are, a lot of them are dependent on the progress of countries dealing with COVID. You can see here, India shows a very high expected GDP growth. But if you look at the news now, international news, they're considered the new hotspot, and they're struggling significantly because of COVID. I think they have the highest contraction rate and fatality rate in the world at the moment. So, I mean, overall, the world economy is projected to grow. 2021 is going to look like it's going to be a strong year all over the world, including the US. The one thing that could kind of put a damper on all this is inflation concerns. I've seen that there have been, discussions about the lumber prices, and anybody who's dealing with steel or aluminum is obviously seeing huge increases from 65 to 60%. The lumber projection, the lumber increase, I had to revise this presentation just a couple of days ago from 200 to 250% increase. And international freight, what you were paying $3,000 for ocean freight. Last year, this time, you're paying upwards of 9,000 and above, and you're still having an issue with capacity. Why are these prices going up? There's different reasons. I mean, part of the reason was that a lot of these production areas, steel mills, lumber yards, they had to reduce their capacity or production because of COVID restrictions. And then in turn, there's been a huge demand as well. So it's a low supply and a high demand. I mean, lumber, which is affecting the scaffold planks as well. I mean, it's dealing, if you're trying to buy I mean, the housing market has been red hot, and the supply, low, the supply being limited has exacerbated the problem. Then there's also discussions about industries possibly removing capacity, especially the ocean freight carriers, removing capacity to increase the rates. So, I mean, generally, again, the outlook is looking good. Even as of a month ago, the Fed wasn't talking about inflation, although, we were seeing prices going up even before then. And it looks like this has now been kind of front and center a concern. So that's generally the economic outlook that we have. Last year during the committee, Andrew and I, we discussed, we started doing research into how to compare our safety record in the US and the construction industry as a whole to the rest of the world. The majority of our information we get from the International Labor Organization. They consolidate all the world's statistics on safety in different industries as well as construction. And, we found some challenges in comparing data between different countries. For one, different countries categorize what's a construction differently. There's been two recognized international standards, a revision 4 and a revision 3. And in our presentation, we showed how people who are using the older revisions, how that could skew the numbers. In addition, different countries have different ways of providing information. We have OSHA and the Department of Labor. The UK has also a federal agency, the HSE, but other countries just rely on either insurance or mainly insurance statistics for their fatality ratings in any given industry. Despite the challenges that we, found in comparing this data, I think, it gives us a pretty good picture of where the US construction industry as a whole stands against the rest of the world. And I would have to say that we're lagging significantly. If you can see, a lot of European countries, as well as Japan, have a far better safety record. I included here the Russian Federation number, although in my presentation I talk about, it's a bit suspicious that well, it's very suspicious that they have such a low rating, but I would consider it disregard that. But again, we found that the UK has a significantly better safety record than the US. And during our conference, we invited Robert Candy. He's the president of the Scaffold Association in the UK. And he did a great presentation, really comparing the differences in our industries, and also discussing the differences between our ANSI fall protection standards and their work from height standards. So, based off of this research, we wanted to start looking and researching, different aspects of these industries and see what is that what is the main reason that these other countries are doing far better than us. And our current research has been focused on the training standards in different countries. And I'll let Andrew take up.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Thanks. So what we decided to take a look is to take a deeper focus into fatality statistics that we saw and we were able to find. And the first phase of this is to take a closer look at the training and competency requirements that are across the world, to look for commonalities, but also look for differences, to try and understand if there's lessons to be learned from other training plans, and to find out if there's best practices that we can bring back to the association. And one of the things that we did find is that there isn't a clear guidance with respect to the statistics over standardized and mandated training requirements across countries. And in fact, countries that we thought we'd find government mandated training, such as US, Canada, UK, do not specifically call out those specific requirements other than competency. Whereas some countries such as Denmark, Norway, and South Africa are in fact calling out government mandated requirements, in some cases right the way down to the curriculum that's going to be taught to scaffolders as they work through the learning phase, or the early learning phase of the trade. And one of the focuses, looking at the word of the competency, that was interesting to find is that it seems the world over, there is a fairly common competency language that's around there, based around training, experience, and knowledge. That was kind of interesting to find. What was interesting is that the vast majority of countries have the requirement for the employer to declare that competence of an employee, whether it be a supervisor, inspector, whatever, wherever a competent person is required. And there's slightly different definitions when it comes to competent person against competent supervisor, and that sort of thing. But there is, in fact, a couple of countries we found which have actually expanded on this and require a documented competent person on a site, in writing, on site, while activities related to working at height and access are being worked on. It's kind of interesting to see that coming into play right now, where we actually have language in the UK, for example, around temporary works coordination, but also in South Africa, we actually see this written requirement for a documented person. So taking a look at the training that we've started to look at, and looking first at Denmark, one of the interesting factors we found is that the training is government mandated. It's a 3-week training program from a classroom perspective. The workforce in Denmark is actually 100% union based, just from an interest perspective. And the training is not necessarily specific to a product category or an equipment type. And it's more of a generalized approach to the concept of scaffold as it relates to installation, erection, dismantle, etc. What was interesting to find is that the 3-week training course that the young scaffold apprentices undertake is heavily funded by the government, both the course itself and then also the pay for the attendance by the apprentice. And they actually include in here, presuming the apprentice is away from home, the cost of LOA. So the live out allowance, if you will, is covered here. And interestingly, in the Danish market, after 3 months of employment, the employer actually must sit down and offer these options to the scaffolder to allow them to move forward into a more advanced role. And that program that comes from there is a 2-year training program based on the job in college, but also during that time, there's a supervision is provided to as the trainee undergoes training. To ensure that they're available and working in those areas of focus that the course has. And in Denmark, we see roughly a 10-to-1 uptake in terms of the ratio between non-trained and trained to this advanced level of scaffold operative. Now, staying in Scandinavia and moving across to Norway, we were able to sit down and have a great discussion with a gentleman called Geir Guhl, who is the president of the Norwegian Scaffold Association, and at the moment is actually president of UEG, the European Scaffold Association. He was very forthcoming and certainly will be an interesting resource as we go through the information we were able to glean and as we work towards gaining more information. But the story in Norway is a 3-week mandated training program. There's a 1 week of theory, a couple of weeks of practical associated with that, which again is government funded from a training perspective. Now, moving into the concept of an advanced scaffolder, which is something that Norway has, they actually undergo their training. The high schools are operating a trade or vocational curriculum in the last 2 years of school. So they're taking 16-year-olds and moving them into like a trade school type situation, similar to how the old apprenticeships would work. And that 2 year, or the last 2 years of high school, is more focused upon the kind of life and the kind of work they'll be, the educational requirements for the work they'll be undertaking in their careers. So there's, for example, the written side of the curriculum is based upon report writing, talking about compliance discussions regarding that. And then also they're talking more about the math that's associated with it. The interesting part, Sam, if you could just go back for a second, just to draw out here, is that we are looking at a very extensive practical experience stage to get to that advanced scaffolder portion. And it's actually a 6-year program to be able to go into that. And the culmination of that 6 years is actually a certification exam, which, believe it or not, is a 5-hour written exam. Which we're interested to learn more about, and we certainly plan to have another discussion with Geir to understand what is part of that. But there's a full 5-day practical exam required as well to ensure that the scaffolders are of a certain caliber, a certain level of training prior to certification. Now, interesting here is the onshore workers, so the workers that are not involved in the oil and gas sector, which is the largest single sector in Norway. There's about 30% of the onshore workers obtain the certificate, whereas offshore, where the money tends to be a little better, there's an uptick in pay for advanced scaffolders. Around 70 to 80% of the operatives offshore are actually carrying an advanced scaffolders degree, and it's seen as a degree in Norway. They treat the program quite seriously. Moving into the United Kingdom, the UK has a different approach. There is no government mandated training per se. However, the main contractors, the main owners have formed a council called the Construction Leadership Council, the CLC, which has mandated training requirements for all trades obtaining access to their job site, which effectively means that the vast majority of companies are following these training requirements that are more than just a small sort of ma and pa scaffold company. What we see here is that despite the non-government requirement, there's a huge uptake, and this uptake crosses over the boundaries between the non-union and the union-based workers. And the way that they have this set up is they have the Construction Skills Certificate Scheme or Certification Scheme, which is the CSCS, and that is the general holding, if you will, for all of the trades. And each trade has one or more organizations below that deliver certified workers into that scheme. And for scaffolding right now, there's just one, and that's the Construction Industry Scaffolders Record Scheme, the CISRS scheme. The interesting part here is they do break out the job functions by title as you grow into your experience. So the first would be, for example, a site worker, not able to climb, not able to build, and then moving into like trainee scaffolders into more advanced roles. Interesting here is it's a 4-year scheme to an advanced scaffolder, but they do break apart the equipment quite harshly. So we have we have a tube and fit or tube and clamp portion, and then a systems portion broken out. And systems actually goes beyond just the systems and the concept of system scaffolding right the way down into individual manufacturers training. So for example, a ring manufacturer or 2 ring manufacturers may have to offer those training programs on their systems within the program to be considered a fully trained advanced scaffolder. Now, there's training centers that are utilized, and from going from entry to the trade to the 4 years advanced is just 30 days of courses through these training centers. However, there is a requirement for documented experience as the trainees go through their work life to ensure that they're gaining the correct experience. This is known as the NVQ within the UK, non-vocational qualifications. And each of these, they're looking for practical evidence. In some cases, it's a picture with a thumbs up, other that's a little more in front of a finished scaffold. In other cases, it's actual video evidence of a scaffold being erected by the trainee or the trainee actively involved in that. And again, due to the nature of this, we've sort of defined this as on the job and a college-based type approach to the training. We included South Africa, which seems to be an odd country to include. The reason we did that is there's been some real movement recently in their standardization. They introduced a standard SANS 10085 a couple of years ago, and it's just been rewritten and it certainly has been bolstered to become a more broadly defined scope. Which gets really into the details as it relates to both erection dismantle procedures, but also incidentally training. And this has come from the requirement that has been brought forward by the government in the recent years regarding training and construction regulations. So construction regulations in South Africa require that all tradespeople undergo formalized training. This training must be carried out through government certified training establishments. It is job title based, both by trade, and then as you get into the trade, it breaks down into more individualized job functionality, everything from working on a site right the way through to inspection of scaffold, erection, and advanced erection. And what we're seeing here, it's about a 2.5-year span from entry into the trade to become a scaffold team leader. There is a requirement for documented experience, which is brought forward to the training establishments as people move through their training program. But the really interesting part is there actually is a specific curriculum detail for each of those job titles within the standard. So we have a situation where the construction regulations are pushing back to the standard's named and is adhered to. What very early feedback we have from the market here is the industrial organizations and owners have jumped on this. And in fact, the pulp and paper industry, and it looks like oil and gas and possibly power, are going to be forcing this mandated standard in as early as January next year. Which means there's going to be significant changes to the industry as they go through, including the formalization of training, but also the formalization of erection dismantle practices and the way that work is documented on site. And this is actually the example where we are required there to have a documented, competent person to oversee all activities on the job site. I mentioned this at the start of the presentation. So it gives us a bit of an overview about the training that's going on elsewhere in the world, and we're going to do some more digging to try and understand and try and draw more comparisons as we go forward through our research. Now, in addition to the research associated with the training standards, we're keeping our eyes open on the comparative international standards and looking at, for example, as our speaker mentioned in summer, the comparison, for example, between working at heights versus ANSI and how that would compare between the UK and the US, for example. And then also keeping a close eye on the EN, the European standards, the SANS in South Africa, German standards, and of course, as that relates to ANSI. Looking at this, we feel too that we need to take a look at the regulatory structures that work to control activities or manage activities on site. So as Sam mentioned, looking at the comparison of how HSE in the UK works against OSHA, for example. One of the early findings we have here is the nature of how penalties are applied for non-compliance. And in fact, we see in the UK a bit more of a proactive approach. Although the inspectors aren't necessarily walking around and visiting the sites in a preventative nature as much as certainly most of the industry would like to see. We are certainly seeing, though, that the penalties can apply at the employer level, but also at the employee level. And very, very rarely does a week or a month go by without hearing a story of scaffold that's photographed acting unsafely, building a scaffold on an open street somewhere, not tied off. Someone will take a picture, pass it into the HSE. That company's chased down, the scaffolder is chased down, And then often we're seeing penalties assessed, financial penalties, and quite stiff assessed on those workers. And the same is true of the investigation of fatalities post-incident as well, and the penalties that are applied and passed down to companies for negligence are pretty stiff. So we're looking at that and trying to gain a better understanding to see if that has a driving force in the reasons why the fatalities are seen quite differently. And finally, something that was brought up again in the presentation in the summer is how contractors and owners see themselves in their role in safety. We're looking deeper into the CLC, for example, to understand how that works both in the commercial construction environment and also in the industrial environment, and looking at how there's differences potentially between the two sides of the ocean. And then we'll expand that as we look forward to what's happening, for example, in South Africa with their industrial organization taking a more proactive role to see if there's lessons to be learned and best practices to come back. And all of this sort of is great, but we have to, of course, take all of this with a pinch of salt as we go through and understand that there are cultural differences between countries. For example, the willingness of governments in Scandinavia to push and provide that training as part of a formal training program, and the difference perhaps of it being more worker-based or driven by companies themselves in various countries, obviously within the US. So that's sort of what we've been working on today, and where our plans are looking to go. But we'd certainly like to hear of any other areas that you'd like us to focus on, other than what we have documented here.
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, thanks, Andrew. I mean, as you can see, there's a lot of areas when we're looking at comparing the scaffolding and access industries all over the world to the US. There's a lot of areas that we could focus our training on. And so we, at this point, we'd like to just open up a discussion, see if there's anybody has an opinion about, which area of our research do they think should be our next priority.
I want to know how much caffeine Andrew had.
Well, considering it's afternoon, I think
it's late in the
all of us.
Any questions?
I just want to add. I mean, that was very well researched, Andrew and Sam, and a good presentation. Very useful data. Obviously, the biggest question is, should we do something about it here in the United States? Right? Are there things that the SAIA can do to look at this, what's going on elsewhere, and implement not necessarily all of it, but certainly some of the features that you've highlighted?
I think that what we hope to do through the research is to understand if there's some commonalities between the two. Certainly the concept of competency was really interesting to see that despite the language differences, the underlying factors are still there, and they're seen and taken as seriously in other countries as they are in the US. What is interesting though is the training aspect. There's very, very different approaches. And trying to understand if there's common ground between them. The duration seems to be fairly common, for example, the type of training. So we're going to dig deeper and look at the curriculums a little more to try and understand what we can pull from there to see if that gives us, leading edge indications as to why they see differences. And of course, with that, take a look at the ratings when it relates to fatalities and incidents. In the UK, we can drag that data out to the nth degree, as I'm sure you're aware. We can pull that data down and look at trades, whereas we don't have that necessarily ability to do that through either a trade association such as SAIA or through OSHA to that level of detail. It tends to get aggregated together, but to try and understand what's related to scaffold companies and what's related to scaffold users is something that we'll definitely try and keep our eye on, to understand if, first of all, if we do have a problem, and secondly, how does that problem get solved, or what suggestions can we draw, And
just from the bit of research we had regarding the training standards, and the discussions we had with the associations in Norway, I mean, it seems to me that we could potentially, if we found out some more information about, what is, I don't know if we're going to ever apply a 5-hour exam, but I mean, a scaffolder there working for, under this program knows how to, calculate, or at least assist with, win ratings and more advanced, ideas. So, I mean, I could potentially see us building, using the testing standards that they're using in Europe, which seem to be more extensive, and using that to build off of this, of what we're doing at the SAIA. One idea too, in Denmark, I was told that when a scaffold builder, they have an incentive. I think they said that a scaffold builder in Denmark that passes or gets through the 2-year course and passes the scaffold exam, there's a 10-15% pay increase, but also they're given a belt to wear that they use in the job site to easily identify those people who, those scaffold builders who have passed this advanced course. So, I mean, that if SAIA is providing certification, then maybe we could find a way, to identify those people who have passed a competent person, more clearly on the job site. I don't know what's currently being done at the moment, but again, the training and that they're doing, I think, could possibly something that we can apply at the SAIA.
Yeah, I mean, Sam, I think at least certainly not necessarily apply the training as such, but find out a little bit more about what the training consists of, because obviously we have some very good training programs within the industry, and particularly from the SAIA. But maybe we do, we could look at some of the aspects of the training. Why is it longer in some countries than others? Why does it take more time? Do they get in more in depth, or is it just repetitive, going over and over the same thing? To find so that we can see whether we can adapt that into the training programs that we have both currently and also are in the process of reviewing and updating at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I thought there's definitely room for us to dig a lot deeper into the training standards. I know, for example, in Sweden that we didn't profile Sweden, but in Sweden, they provide different certifications for scaffolders, that a scaffolder based off of the height of the scaffold. So if you were not certified to build a scaffold higher than 20 meters, you couldn't even work on a site that's more than 20 meters, even if you were only going to work up to 20 meters. But yeah, I mean, and then also, I mean, I'd be more curious about, what a 5-day training course for scaffold builders is going to be on that required 3 weeks. So yes, yeah, I agree. I mean, we don't know enough about them right now, but it'd be worth looking into a lot more closely.
Hey, Andrew and Sam, great presentation. This is Dave, by the way. One of the things I found really fascinating, especially towards the beginning of it, was the correlation between the injuries and the countries that were government regulated or government funded. Do you guys expect any of that coming down the pipeline for the US? Any more like government regulations, or what can we expect from that?
I mean, I think Andrew and I had the discussion on this. I mean, I think as far as the government funding of scaffold training, I mean, I think that's one of those cultural differences that we shouldn't expect the US to be able to incorporate anytime soon. I think taxes in Denmark, I was told, are 45 to 50%. So, I mean, obviously the government has a lot more funding to provide. So I don't necessarily see us being able to adopt those practices in the US. Andrew?
I think that there's definitely work we can do on the stats to dig a little deeper to understand over a period of time where, as I mentioned in my answer to Steve there, where those incidents are occurring. Are they based at the scaffold company level during erection practices, dismantle, or are they actually with scaffold users going on to unsafe scaffold? Or the descriptions tend to be a little broad in a lot of the research we've started in the US compared to where it gets broken down to in the UK, for example. And so we want to try and take a look at that to try and determine whether or not, first of all, that we have a problem, and if we do have a problem, what does that look like, and what can be offered? Is there an underlying reason? Are there some real indicators? And I think that we have to dig in a little deeper to that to be able to come back, and it's something that we are planning on doing. But looking at the overall industries in each of the countries we've been dealing with, we'll hope be able to find some good solid ideas as to why those stats will vary and how they may vary. So
Thank you for your question, David.
You gave us a lot of information.
Hey guys, this is Ali. I was just going to ask first of all, thank you for putting forward a speaker for annual convention. Much appreciated. But also just curious in terms of your research, if there's any opportunity to explore how the different markets account for, I would imagine having these more stringent training requirements in some cases would constrain the labor market. So just curious if these other markets have explored ways of encouraging participation or other ways they've addressed either the shortages or costs of labor as a result of the training requirements that they're enforcing.
Yeah, I can answer that directly. Actually, in our discussion with Norway, just as a start, as an example, GEAR was very quick to turn around and say the vast majority of the scaffolding being carried out in Norway is not by Norwegians. It's actually being carried out by Eastern Europeans, whether it be from Poland or Latvia, Romania. And they're undergoing the same training programs. The UK has done something similar to this, although the training isn't accepted in the UK. They've taken a watered down version and pushed that out into other countries. So there are sort of broken down programs, but there's no comparative use between the two today, other than that we found in Norway so far. So we're going to do some more digging to look at that as we explore the markets that we've been chatting with, to try and find out that if that training is being delivered in localized languages, for example. Is that training being delivered in Poland? Is it being delivered in Romania? And if so, is it in Norwegian? And those kinds of things, to understand how that training has gone forward. But yeah, GEAR was very, very quick to tell us the vast majority of scaffolding is not being done by Norwegians. It's actually being done by offshore workers or workers that are not native to Norway. So.
And also from the research, they said the offshore, the percentage of offshore scaffolders that have that advanced degree, including that, either the 4 years or the 6 years of practical experience, the percentage is much higher in the offshore, but in the onshore scaffolding, it makes up about 20 to 30%. So you still have 70 to 80% of the workers that haven't undergone that 2-year program and have that advanced scaffolder certificate, but rather just that 3-week government mandated training.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
No problem.
Any other questions? All right. If there's nothing else, I just as a final, part of our presentation, as Ali mentioned, we've got a speaker for the convention. I mentioned we saw him speaking at the CPWR, it's Construction Safety and Research organization. Did a really great job, and he's actually in Toledo, Ohio, so it worked out very well that he's just a drive away from Cleveland. Thomas Kramer, he's the director of the American Society of Safety Professionals. He's a chair of the ANSI Z359 Fall Protection Code. And like I said, relevant to the International Council's work, he's the president of the International Fall Protection. So He's got a lot of great information with his work in ANSI as well as his work in the UK with the Work from Heights standard. And I think he's going to be able to show us a lot of good comparisons between our two countries and those two industries. So I'm looking forward to hearing him speak in Cleveland, and I'm looking forward to being in Cleveland.
Absolutely.
All right. With that, I mean, if there's any other questions, we can take them, but if not, that concludes our presentation.
Well, thank you both. And we're looking to see you in Cleveland.
Well, yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.
Thanks, you all.
Both take care.
Bye.
You guys, you have a good rest of the week.
All right, we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We will be back here at 1 p.m. Eastern for the Shoring Council session. Thank you.